Outer Orange.
Welcome to the one and only Burger Boat, as people know him probably a little bit better as FLAGBURG for VANGUARD overdress. Alright guys, so welcome back. I just came back from Puerto Rico. It's like day 2 of me coming back from Puerto Rico, and I wanted to obviously talk about my top 8 in standard. So today we're going to be talking about the top 8 deck that I took, which is FLAGBURG, why I took it, the deck itself, and just kind of go from there. So let's go ahead and switch to our favorite screen. One of my favorite decks that I've been piloting pretty much since pretty much the release of it, and I'm so excited I finally have an official top with it. I've been piloting this deck for a while. I've performed real well with this deck over time. If you guys don't know my channel, we talked about this deck quite a lot in the past. There's other people that I know that have topped with this deck. This deck is actually just kind of insane sometimes. Out of all the decks out there, this is actually the most deck I'm comfortable in currently in Overdress D, which is kind of crazy to think about considering the fact that I play Zorga as well and all these other decks, but I've spent so much time with FLAGBURG that it just kind of makes sense to me, which is even funnier because I don't play Aquaforce, but yet here we are. So pretty much why I chose it. This deck has a really good matchup into pretty much everything in meta. It's always been like that. It's actually one of its hardest matchups was actually Magnolia, because at the time Magnolia has the exact same pacing as FLAGBURG. The difference is that FLAGBURG can kill faster, but if FLAGBURG can't kill fast enough, then Magnolia wins the late game, right? So literally one of the hardest decks I would say was Magnolia, right after that is Baron Magnus, but into every other deck that was in meta, FLAGBURG is actually really good into it. Gravidia is actually a relatively pretty easy match. Prison can be tough, but it's not really a problem if you play your cards correctly. And then there's obviously Nirvana, not an issue against Nirvana in my opinion. This deck farms for PGs pretty quickly, so it's not really an issue there. Kyrie is definitely not an issue. You can retire their stuff and kind of apply pressure that way. Also not a terrible deck to go into, similar draw size, all that kind of stuff. Probably Baron Magnus is pretty tough, as I mentioned earlier. I think I might be missing a deck or two. Like Bastion's another one, but Bastion's also Bastion was meta at the time when I was playing FLAGBURG, and Bastion was one of the easiest matchups and actually made it even easier to play FLAGBURG because since Bastion was more popular, playing FLAGBURG was even better. And just in general, any grade 4 deck kind of loses to this deck because this deck has so much pressure pretty much the minute it rides 3 that you have to be very careful. So if you're trying to play for the long game, FLAGBURG will stop you from that. And that's what I like about this deck. I like the fact that this deck can pretty much push you out of the water before you even have the chance to do anything. There's been a lot of games where I kill people before they ride to 3 or before they ride to 4. And that's kind of the point of the deck. Start off with 0. I still stuck to, if you guys saw the last time I did any tie deck profile on this, you'll notice that the ride will actually be very similar. But I have this guy, I play this just as a meta starter game as well. A lot of people know me as a big Grand Blue and Zorga lover, so a lot of people actually assume that I'm playing Zorga, so I actually stick to this starter quite a lot. I will make them have to sit there and think like, why in the world am I playing? And normally they'll think Zorga because then the next card that comes up is of course our boy Ranker Chain, one of the best cards to be printed in Stoicheia still to this day. So Blast, draw 2, discard order. So free, so easy. It does have a Rigard skill, and actually this card in particular will come up in this deck. Surprisingly enough, we will be using the skill. The secondary skill just gets plus 2k on a rearguard circle if you play in order. This will come in handy. This is an order wide line, and surprisingly enough, we will be using orders and we will be popping this guy out. So don't deny this guy. He's actually really good. Next we have the Black Tears Husk Dragon. Now I will say I did test the Ascendance Assault. I actually tested it for about, I tested FLAGBURG Order specifically for a while through order decks. If they have the ride, then they have like 7 orders in them, 7+. I think they're pretty much in a FLAGBURG order because you can go pure where you have the pure ride line, have like pure FLAGBURG in it. It does work. Actually, so recently got first place with it, so it's possible. But so I'm running this over Ascendance Assault, and there's a couple of reasons why. I felt Ascendance Assault felt too fragile. If I happen to bump into matchups that tend to retire early, like Buff Saga or something like that, if I early pop out that Ascendance Assault, I actually can lose the game that way. So I found out over time that this is still the better card. Unfortunately, because I actually really liked the idea of having an extra card in my deck space to kind of just throw in whatever I wanted, but as I kept playing, the more I kept testing, I actually lost a lot more playing FLAGBURG Order over just this way. When at least we of course have FLAGBURG Dragon. Now you notice, as I mentioned, if you're up to this point, a lot of people won't know what you're playing, which is amazing. A lot of people think you're Zorga, and actually my deck specifically, even more so, people think I'm playing Zorga, and so they realize I'm playing FLAGBURG, which is also just a great way to kind of mind game your opponent out for a W because they won't know what you're doing, and because they don't know what you're doing, they don't really know what to do to battle. And if you don't know, in D, mulligan is insanely important. Mulligan's really important, and also just early preparing your turn is super early. What you discard really matters in overdress. It's a super important concept. It's actually something that makes it it's probably the highest skill level part. It's not everything, but it's one of the higher skill levels of that differentiates between a good player and a bad player, and it's all dependent on how you discard for ride. Just in general, keeping track of what your opponent discards for ride, but also what you discard for ride. Like just in general, keeping that knowledge is important and why you're discarding what you're discarding. So for example, if you know you're going to face like a multi-attack deck, then maybe you don't need perfect guards as much. If you know you're facing a deck that guard restricts, then maybe you don't need those perfect guards there either. If you know a deck doesn't need, you do need a perfect guard against, then maybe you'll keep your perfect guard as you're discarding stuff and you'll discard shield instead. These things are very important, but in this deck particular, because they don't really know what you're playing, it will be harder for them to discard what they want to deal with you, and they'll be kind of more discarding for themselves, which is good for you because you're at the advantage essentially. Skill is very simple. When it attacks, if it's a certain battle amount, you pretty much get some effects. If it's the third battle, you get a draw. If it's a fourth battle, you get to retire something. There's an errata on this card. You choose the two things you retire, not the opponent. And then last but not least, the final one, which is the kind of the thing that the glue that puts the win con together, is pretty much if on this attack your opponent has to drop 3 cards, and it does go around like perfect guards and stuff like that. So if they want a perfect guard but they have 5 cards in hand, they have to still drop a card, and they have to discard 4 cards essentially total from hand. It's really rough. They'll usually be handless and they're kind of stuck in these really bad situations, and they pretty much just lose that way. So the guard string is very important. It does require 5 attacks. It does require getting to those 5 attacks, but there's a lot of stuff in this deck that lets you get there pretty easily. But overall, that's pretty much the deck, and like the ride line part of the deck. Your persona, obviously you need persona, very important. Persona will win you games. Sorry, there's a little bit of a glare. Persona will win you games. Persona is actually very important in this deck specifically. You definitely want to find it. If you're going first, you definitely want to find a persona. If you're going second, you can kind of not care about that persona as well. Then you have to worry about more like power gaining units and kind of that kind of stuff. So just something to keep in mind. But yeah, just really, really strong. Persona is like really OP in this deck. It usually will win you the game. If you persona all 4 times, you probably got it. So plus draw, plus 10k power, just OP. Next, we have the next busted card. That is Inlets. This is Inlets Pulse Dragon. Literally a great card, and it's meant for this deck, so of course in here it's gonna be amazing. If you swing with it and your opponent's on Great or greater, you can Soul Blast restand him on first attack specifically. So you swing with him first all the time, then you restand him. Keep in mind, if you're going first, you can't use him going second. He's where he's most optimal. So you really have to mulligan. Again, it's all on that mulligan. You have to really mulligan carefully. If you're going first, you don't really need these as much. You still want to find at least one, but you have a lot more time to find one, and you're definitely more focusing on finding persona over this. So you may not always want to mulligan this. However, if you're going second, you 100%, 102% definitely want to see this ASAP. Now, last but not least, let's talk about the third card here, the third grade 3 that I had a lot of people asking questions about, and I'll answer it here because this is the time. I might go on like a 10-minute rant about this card, but here we go. It is the Roaming Prison Dragon. I have 3 copies of him in here. I actually wish I could have 4 copies of him in here, but here he is. This is what he looks like. Yes, he is in SP, and he's absolutely beautiful in SP. This card is actually, I love this art. As weird as it sounds, I'm actually so into this art. It's not even funny. Anyway, so let's talk about this card. What does it do? It says when you play an order, you can call him out. So after you play the order, you can call him out. You can choose 10k or on him, or you can give him a crit. Usually, in this case, under Alchemy Magic, you can do both. Of course, we're not Alchemy Magicking any points, so it's mainly just for the 10k and the crit rate. So why in the world am I running this card? It's his order card, right? What is it doing in here? It's a couple of reasons. So if you're bricking, but you have orders in hand, and you happen to have 2 of these in discard, these are perfect. So these really just help you just in really awkward situations where you're kind of missing some stuff, but also these are just really good for early rush. So if you need to early rush, these are amazing. And what you can do is you can actually play Soul Body Condensation and do the Zorga loop where you bring this guy out and you bring this card out, and then you have a 30k column attacking your opponent. I do also want to thank Sam Legan again. So Sam actually piloted the dragons in FLAGBURG a while ago. And then we kind of found out over time that they were kind of clunking the deck a little bit, and then Sam actually went back to the dragons, which I faced him back when I was practicing FLAGBURG order. And as I was practicing FLAGBURG order, I found out that what he was doing was better than what I was doing. So I was like, screw it, I'll just go back to the dragons. So I went back to the dragons too. So that's a big thanks to Sam Legan as always. Sam is part of Triple Sleeve. He comes up with some of the craziest decks, and one of the deck ideas was actually FLAGBURG himself a while back, and I shouted him out in the past, and I am shouting him again because honestly, he kind of gave me the idea for the dragons. I knew about them. I've ran them in the deck before, but they felt kind of clunky. But in the meta that we're kind of in right now, this card actually seemed very well. Gravidia, tries to retire. Sometimes you'd rather just have the dragons on the board. So anyway, so the dragons. Now there's a couple things like I said. You can on turn 2 rush your opponent down because you literally do not care what happens to these things. Like it just doesn't matter. Your opponent, you're going second. Your opponent writes Buff Saga. They board wipe your front row. You're like, okay, cool. I don't care. You just board up my dragons. Like you literally just don't care, right? The other thing is if you're really breaking and you don't have an Sense of Soul and you don't have inlet at all, these are also good substitutes. They're 50k beaters. You don't have to shove hand. Now let's say you have one piece but you don't have the other piece. So say you have an Sense of Soul. Well then cool, you can just still play an order that's a dead shield in your hand anyway, and then you can call a dragon out, you can maybe call a booster or something and still kind of do something without having a completely dead turn. And they're just really good for pokes. So low-key, these cards like came in super clutch. Against Prison, I won my games because I was able to rush them down with these cards, and it's surprisingly enough just very powerful. Most of the decks where I knew I can rush them down, I just did. The only matchup I lost where I just didn't get the chance to just kill fast enough was actually Bruce, and that's just because I was kind of breaking against Bruce and I just never saw it at the attacker, and that's just it's just how it is. But these were keeping me in the game, so I was able to just keep doing. The other thing is you don't have to like you give up your hand as much, and like I said, like if you know you're gonna get board wiped by anything, you'd rather get board wiped with these, right, than the pieces you need, and you can kind of hold the turn with these cards. They're very defensive, as funny as they are offensive, because you call these out and you secure your hand, and you don't have to sit here and go through all your Ascendance Assaults and all your Inlet Pulses and then kind of be stuck. So if you know your opponent's gonna do something crazy next turn, you can just call these out instead, and then just hold a turn and just kind of secure yourself with the cards in your hand they actually need. And then next turn, if you know you can go for the kill, you can set up that way, and you can just get your full combo ready with your Inlet and your Ascendance Assault, and then just go full beast mode, right? So you can kind of like, it helps you tempo out when you want to actually go in. Whereas normally, if you don't have cards like these, you're stuck in this position where you're forced to call out the cards that you need in your hand, and then you can lose them, which kind of sucks. So this lets you kind of tempo out a lot better. I was very surprised just how well this performed while I was at BCS Puerto Rico, but I will say, like, it's almost hard for me to want to take these cards out and put shelling in, just because of how versatile this card has been. Now, the shelling question, I was not 100% sure if I could play shelling, so I chose not to just risk it. I could have asked, but I got lazy. I just didn't feel like asking. I already tested this deck so much. It would have meant, and I didn't know shelling was going to drop like that. If I had some preparation or thought like, yeah, like shelling is going to drop soon, I would have obviously tested shelling and probably taken shelling if I knew what I was doing with it. But because I've spent so much time on this deck and how this deck works without shelling for literally months now, it was hard for me to switch transition too quickly like that. I only had like about 2.5 weeks to make the transition. I just didn't feel it was worth making it, on top of me not knowing if I could even play the card. So I was like, screw it, I'll just hold off on playing shelling. I knew this deck would perform perfectly well, and actually even into a mirror match, because I can kind of beat him down really quickly, I actually felt the dragons would be better into a mirror match than having the shelling, so I chose that route. There's actually one more thing. If I early discard these, which is usually the plan, my opponent will assume I'm playing Zorgo 100%. If they don't see this, they 100% think I'm playing Zorgo, which again only sets up my turn even more. They think I have 3 attacks. They're farming perfect guards, because against Zorga you really need perfect guards. Something to keep in mind, when you play against Zorga you need perfect guards. However, into FLAGBURG, perfect guards really don't do much. So if my opponent's assuming I'm playing Zorga, then they're gonna farm for perfect guards, which actually screws them over more than it helps them, which is actually just a very funny thing, because these dragons like help that. If I mulligan and get these dragons, they are literally the best discard fathers. You can also do some really funny stuff. You can rush on turn 1 if you want to, if you're going second and you have the grade 1 Magnolia order. It says like you give something 5k every time something else attacks. You pretty much give it that skill, and you can double call dragons on the discard of Ranker Chain. It's a funny interaction I can show later, but pretty much you can do something like that. It almost rarely comes up. It's a super high roll thing. It will almost never happen, but it's a really funny thing that you can do. So it's just really funny. But yeah, that's the dragons. So here's Ascendance Assault, the homie. This is pretty much your bread and butter with your FLAGBURG and your inlets. It's a 2-card combo with FLAGBURG on board. Essentially, you have this, you have Inlet Pulse, you have FLAGBURG as your Vanguard. Guess what? You can have 5 attacks, and it's just great. His first skill is a Vanguard skill. You can pretty much discard. You can reveal a FLAGBURG and not discard and prop him out if you ride on top of him. Or you can, his other skill says when something else attacks, you can combo restand him. And yes, these do work on both of them. So if you have one here and one here, and you have a Vanguard, you can, go like this and then like that, and then like this and then like that and like this. You pretty much can do 5 combo. You can do 5 attacks with just 2 of him and FLAGBURG for the Starship, but you don't have to. It's very counter heavy, but you can do it. So he's just a very good card, just a restander. It's really good at putting crits on him. In case you do go for 4 attacks, you can put all triggers on him and then have him restand twice for big power. I run 2 of this thing. This is the Sylvian Horned Beast Lyoka. I just call it the Magnolia card because it really is just a Magnolia card, but it's floating in FLAGBURG, funnily enough. Now there's 2. There's the pony. Can't remember the pony's name, but there's the pony that you retire it and you give 2 things 5k, or there's Luca, which you retire it and you give 1 thing 10k. And I will tell you, you, I have no idea which one's better. I have tested both, and for some reason I chose to stick to this, and this came up every single time. I used it every single game, I'm pretty sure, and I actually, in most cases, I used 2 copies. It was actually kind of insane. There's one game I was on stream, and I'm pretty sure I went through 2 of these, and my opponent was just like, his eyes were like, I'm dead when I popped 2 of these down, and I made things bigger. Now, why run this? So this is what I was talking about power gainer cards. So you notice if you're going second, you don't have the ability to persona yet, so you're kind of a turn behind. This won't hit. So since this was a 10k, it literally does not hit anything. So you really need something to make it hit. So either you have to revive one using Soul Body Condensation, or you use cards like these, and you just give it 10k power. Inlet will hit, but this card won't. So you really need to wait. This is the way. I had to, obviously, because I ran the dragons, I have to cut back on my I ran the dragons, and the dragons used to be more power gainers, but I chose the dragons instead just because of the kind of the meta. But yeah, power gainers are really good. They really help a Sense of Soul just kind of exist and do its thing. And also on non-persona turns, it's just really good to pop 2 and then just give all your rear guards power. Now they can hit stuff and do their thing, and it makes it like a pseudo persona turn because FLAGBURG himself gets a 10k anyway. So long story short, these are just, you know, power gainers. Order area, we also run 2 of Nectars of Satialism. I used to run 3. I cut back to 2 because I run one other card that I think is a little bit more useful. This card's still really good. Some cut it back. Some run Gum. That's the Gather Upon Me. Gather Upon Me card. I'm still not into Gather Upon Me. I always like the concept of it. I always think about it. I play tests, I can test and stuff like that. I'm like, man, this card's so broken, so good. And then anytime I actually play it, like I actually play against people, it just never does anything for me. And while this card has yet to not do anything for me, my favorite part about this card, it has absolutely no cost on it. Actually, most of the orders I have in my deck have no cost on it except one, and it's just great. It's costless. You just do the thing, and sometimes even early on, if you want to call a dragon out, you can just call something, give that thing whatever power, and the dragon comes out and also gets power. So it's just power gaining. You just get you get an attacker and you get something that gains power off of this card, and it's just really good. The crit is super massive late game. If the game starts dragging out, you kind of need the crit to end games. Like sometimes your opponent will be at exactly 4, or they'll be healing a lot. They'll be going from 5 to 4, from 5 to 4, from 5 to 4. You know, sometimes it happens. It is overdress, and overdress heals tend to happen more. So with that being said, having that crit pressure means they literally have to guard it, and they kind of have no choice. They're put in between a rock and a hard place. And you know, if you're on persona turn, you put this on inlet. Inlet's restanding, and inlet's huge. Your opponent's going to be put in a situation where they'll usually die if the minute you pop this. And I have yet to have like situations where this card hasn't done me good. At worst case scenario, I discard and I don't use it. You know, sometimes I have to discard it, but for the most part, it comes in handy. Of course, there are stronger orders that take priority, but it's still just a very solid card. The Magnolia order. It has Magnolia on the face, so it's the Magnolia order. This is the one that says you give something the ability to gain 5k every time a unit attacks. Like, it has to be another unit, so it can't be the unit that is being attacked. So usually this is best on a booster. However, you can also put it just on a rear guard, like a Sense of Soul or anything else, and it'll just keep gaining power and just keep getting bigger and bigger. I found that this card was a little weak and once I actually started playing. I did use it quite a lot, but I did find it a little weak, and I actually wouldn't mind taking this out and putting this back to Nectar. But it hasn't been bad either. Sometimes the early stuff isn't terrible. You can put it on Vanguard too, so your Vanguard just gets huge, but usually your opponent will be either taking or PGing your Vanguard, so it's been kind of weird. And I always did this thing where I accidentally put it on the attacking rear guard that will be attacking, so what happens, I'd actually lose out on 5k 2 times. Like I remember I put this on Senses like twice, and each time I'm like, oh man, I should put on a booster or something. But then, you know, the booster does only boost once, and the Sense of Soul isn't hitting, and I needed to hit, and that's why I used this to begin with. And it's like this whole process. Like, I found out over time that I was kind of losing more than I was gaining, so I actually might even make this Nectar again, just because I felt this card was a little weak. Body Condensation, still an amazingly strong card. This card is just borderline broken in the fairest way possible. I don't literally mean it's broken, I just mean it's just so good that it's just so hard not to run this card. It's just one of the best cards that Stoke has gotten since release, pretty much. So this card says Soul Blast 1, literally revive a card. You give it 5k. Has to be greater, equal or less than your Vanguard though, so you know you can't call like a 3 on turn 2. But you can call a bunch of other stuff, and it's great. And that power 5k is super important. As I said, you need your sense to hit. It'll just barely hit by, you know, reviving that or just reviving anything. The biggest thing is the revival. The fact that you can revive something is definitely the strongest part. And this card is just absolutely amazing. It is a Soul Blast cost, so it's probably the hardest thing you have to be cautious of, but it is still just so insanely good. And it's a grade 1. It's like the perfect card in every scenario scenario. It's just, especially in D, this card is just absolutely beautiful, absolutely amazing card. So definitely want to run it. You want to always be able to revive something, always be able to do something. Again, it works with the ride line. All the orders work with the ride line. You can discard it and then bring it back to hand. Just very easy, free 99 income. Can't go wrong with it. Just a solid pick. And then we have the this is the Prize Trident. Now, I was having a little space issue for this card. I really want to put it 4, but I had to play it at 3. I was kind of concerned for the prison matchup, because you don't want to see this as early as possible against prison matchup, but I didn't see it too much, and I didn't have too much issues, so luckily enough, this wasn't too terrible. But pretty much at 5 attacks, you can counter charge, put this into soul, and it's just really, it's mainly for the counter charge. It makes FLAGBURG turns just a lot easier to deal with. Regularly, you want to see this card, but you don't always want to mulligan for this. You don't always have to. Sometimes you'll just draw into it, but it is a very useful card. There's been a couple times in the past where I discard this card and I regret my entire life for a ride line because it would lose me the game. So this card is very, very important. You definitely want to maximize as much as possible. Perfect cards. This is the new card. This is the new one, which against triple drive units, you know, you can just pop this and it's great. Another thing, this card is a good thing and a bad thing for FLAGBURG, actually. So if you face FLAGBURG, you can use this and actually goes around the guard restrict. So it saves you a turn from like dying on the guard restrict. So it's a downside for FLAGBURG players. If they try to like kill people, they could just pop this on the, because since it's an order, it's a blitz order, it never actually touches the guard circle. So yeah, that's the thing. So it's unfortunate because it means actually, because of this card is why I think shelling is very important. You need that 6 attack essentially, because this card goes around that. So your Vanguard is pretty much nullified. So you want to put all those triggers on the shelling and then swing with shelling. So that's something to keep in mind. Be very cautious of this because yes, this it can be game changing. And if I was a opponent that really wants to beat FLAGBURG, I will make it my life duty to not show this card at all. I will keep it in my hand until death do us part, until I absolutely have to show it. I would never reveal this unless it's revealed that I literally bring it to hand or a drive check it. I try to keep this as unrevealed as possible, because the minute you reveal this, now the opponent knows that you can nullify one of their attacks, and they might play a little bit differently because of that. Maybe you want them to know, and it's up to you. That's another thing. You can also mind game them. You can trick them into thinking like, oh, they have the PG. Since they have the PG, I can't attack 5 times a turn. There's no point. So you can kind of get that part out, but you know, they still have to discard a card. Like I said, against grade 4 decks, obviously this is what it's kind of meant for. It's really good. It is any triple drive stuff, so any triple drives, I believe that includes strides, you can just pop this and be like, yeah, I nullify your big boy attack. Also, restanding stuff really helps. You know, if they restand it, you can, you know, use this. Definitely came up. It's very useful. It's not, you know, it's just a one-of, but it's great. It's a great one-of. But yeah, and then we have just 3 Vanguard perfect cards. These are the ones where if you PG and you have 2 or more cards in hand, you have to discard. So just very good card. In general, I don't know, it's just a perfect card. Just perfect card doing perfect card things. You know how PGs work. And then let's talk about triggers. El Triggerigos. So I run 4 draw PGs. I think. I'm sorry, 4 draw PGs. My bad. Wrong format. 4 draws with the 10k shield on them. When your opponent's a grade 3 or greater. And yeah, these are great. They're draws. You kind of need draws in this deck. Fronts don't really matter too much, though. They are nice early on, especially with the prison dragons. But you just need draw. You need to see your stuff fast enough, and they just become very handy. Some would recommend 5. I would say 5 is pretty good too. I personally am greedy, and I like my crits. And the reason being is because a lot of people will say no guard to FLAGBURG. Crit, and you win the game. And because I play a more aggro version of the deck, you'll notice that your opponent will usually be at 3-4 damage before they ride to 3. And with that being said, every FLAGBURG turn becomes lethal at that point, or semi-lethal depending on what defenses they hit. Also lowers the chances of them hitting defenses, so I just like the crits. But we run the draws over fronts just because of just how the deck functions. You kind of need the draws. And then we run crits. So I'm running 4 of the soul and crits. I never really use it for the soul unless I play prison. Otherwise, these are just straight shields and you know, crit pressure on Vanguard, of course. I almost never used the insult part. I did use it against one matchup, and that was pretty much it. I never used it after that. I'm one of those people where I almost never put this down unless I'm going for like a game or something, and even then that 2k usually won't make a big difference with how the deck is. You know, your Sense of Soul will be at 12k or 17k or 27k, or your inlet will be like, your inlet could get to a pretty good number depending on how you nectar. Nectar will usually give you 15, which would make it 18, which should make it 28, and then this will make it 30, so that's a pretty good number. And then if it's on Persona, it's 40, but you know, it's really rare. It's kind of a weird one, so I usually don't like look at this and go, oh my god, I have to put it down. It's usually just shield. And then of course, oops, those are heals. And of course, we run 3 vanilla crits, as far as 7 total. just vanilla crits. The 5k does come in handy, by the way. It's very important. You definitely, the 5k power is very, so you want to, I usually try to not guard with these actually, and I will purposely guard with these. There's been quite a few times where I'll actually call a booster behind FLAGBURG to make it an exactly perfect number. So if they somehow, for the life of me, try to tutor past my Vanguard, it'll be even harder because my Vanguard will already be an 18k, and then the Persona will be 28k, and then plus his power buff, he will be 38k. So 30k is a lot harder to guard, even with 3 cards, because sometimes people will drop the 3 cards and they'll try to 1 to pass it or 2 to pass it. So adding this additional 5k will make it harder for them to want to do those conditions. So I sometimes will keep these in my hand for as long as I can, so I can pop them, since these are, I believe, my only 5ks. Aside from OT, they are actually my only 5ks in this deck specifically because, funny transition, but we're going to talk about the heals. I've actually run the new heals. This is actually something that I decided pretty last minute. I kind of did some theory crafting. I actually talked to Jay a little bit too, just kind of about heals, and not just Jay, I talked to a couple people even within my locals and stuff like that, just kind of questions about how the heal guardians, how the heal counter heals are and all this kind of stuff. And I actually decided to go a 2-2 split. You might be asking yourself why. That sounds like really a bad idea. Well, into meta, these are insanely important against Bob Sagara, against Barrow Magnus, against Zorga, against pretty much any games of crit. These have been insanely useful. However, into mirror matches, you really need to see this. They can restand their rear guards. Cool. I'm gonna pop this down into you can do this into Nirvana as well. There isn't as many things that restand, but into a mirror match, I think this is actually very important. So because of that, I decided to keep it. I will say I actually misplayed. I faced it by Sagar at top 8 cut, and I didn't realize I had the crit greater card in hand. I probably could have won the game if I had looked at my hand properly, and I misguarded because of that. I just didn't catch it. I saw heal trigger. I forgot that my heals had effects on them for a game. It's just silly, but it does happen. It was a long day. But anyway, long story short, I was really against these, and because I thought the 10k shield was kind of whack-a-mole. And then I found out it's not that whack-a-mole, actually. That's actually pretty good. So I found out that I'm the whack-a-mole, and I put them in, and ever since I put them in, I haven't regretted taking them out. I haven't felt like I was missing shields. I haven't really felt like I needed it. Now granted, this deck draws a lot, so you don't really feel the pain of that 15k or 10k as much. I will say there has been a couple of games where like I had to drop an extra card because I had these, but for the most part I actually ended up using them. Against Bruce, I actually ended up using them. Like there was actually definitely a couple of games where they came in handy, like legitimately. So you know, Nirvana, oh sorry, you're gonna restand that, cool, this is a 25k shield. So overall they came in handy. So I would recommend testing them. I still don't know if it's good to just go like 2-2 or 4 flat out, or whatever, 3-1, whatever it is. That there's all these different ratios for them, but I definitely found that they definitely came in handy. Last but not least, we have Overtrigger. Here it is, OT, good old Overtrigger. This OT is pretty broken. Heal once, you draw, get 10k power, you get a crit. And with restanding stuff in this deck, if you hit this under like stuff that restands, it's pretty brutal. You know, you can put it on a Sense of Soul. It's 200 million total they have to guard. Pretty nuts. OT is very strong this deck. I actually, in the past when I've played FLAGBURG, my Overtrigger almost never came up, but actually specifically for PR, it did come up offensively twice, 2 games. One game it didn't really matter, they were dead regardless. It was kind of one of those situations where a trigger, I just need to see a trigger. Any trigger, and even if this was a different trigger, they would have lost. And then the other game I had this come out was on turn 2 when I had my full dragon set up, and that was pretty rough too. I ended up putting a prison player to 5 damage. They did heal, so they went back to 4, but long story short, I pushed them to 5. They had like nothing in hand. They had to super guard. They were just in big trouble, and pretty much they lost all momentum, and then I won the game off of it. So I don't know if they could have done anything differently. I wasn't like watching that carefully. I didn't even expect it to hit the OT. It just kind of happened. I had already swung actually with the rear guard, and then I swung with Van, and homie was like no guard, and I go OT, you know, and it was just pretty nuts. But like I said, it did actually come up. Normally, I'm not trying to be like, oh, well, it doesn't always come up, or it just rarely comes up. But you know, through playtesting, like and locals and stuff like that, it really hasn't come up that much. This deck doesn't really deck thin or anything like that. So it's kind of just like what you draw into, honestly. And so I don't like normally see this that often. It's just one of those things where it's in hand, it's in hand, it's in deck, it's in decent deck. I don't know. I just keep going through my deck, and you know, maybe I'll see it, maybe I won't. But yeah, so that's the OT, and yeah, that's pretty much the entire deck. I highly recommend, you know, practicing this deck or taking it or trying it out. This deck has definitely been performing really well under my hands. I will say this deck requires so much testing, unless you're like an Aquaforce expert, and even then under Aquaforce expertness, you still really need to know your matchups. Prison is definitely a matchup to be cautious of. Babsaga, Barrow Magnus, Nirvana, all of them, honestly, all of them. It's very important because, like I said, Mulligan is super huge. Like super huge, and I went on a whole big discussion about Mulligan last time about how you mulligan going first or second. Maybe this time I'll actually make a separate video for how to mulligan as a FLAGBURG player, because it is just so versatile to know how to mulligan. It definitely differentiates of how good you are on the deck, depending on how you mulligan and how you set up. So it's just very crucial. I think that's one reason why people pick this deck up and think it's bad. I thought so too when I first started. I just really didn't see the appeal until I realized that this deck actually has a pretty high ceiling in terms of how you play it. If you're wondering what the dragon combo is for turn 1, I'll show the dragon combo, since that's what people are a little bit more familiar with. But essentially what you do is you ride to 2, and you have some dragons here, and you want to use this card. Sorry, that's the wrong pile. You want to use this card, and you essentially use it. You Soul Blast, call this card here, and you call a dragon here. And ideally what happens here is you have a 30k column, because you get 10k from his skill. You have 5k for calling out this card, which makes it 13, so that's 23, 28. And then you get +2 for playing in order, which makes us 30. So this will be 10, and this will be anywhere between 30 and 40, depending on how you hit triggers and how your opponent guards. And then if you really want to push it even more, if you had the second dragon, you can even do something like this. And if you really want to be annoying, which I have done this before, you can even set up like this. So this makes it so that if your opponent does hit a defensive, this still hits. So you can go Vanguard first, and then go rear guard. This being 23, which is also an annoying number, and this being 30. I've definitely set up my board like this, actually, against, I believe it was Nirvana, and it was very brutal. It was a very brutal setup. They just had to keep saying no guard, and it sucked for them. And the next turn, you know, I ride the big boy. Just call over these, you know, call these guys. I'll call the homies out, and just start going crazy. And if I use an order, then this card actually becomes a 10k booster on top of that, so it's just great. And then, you know, you just go boom, 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 and you just win the game with your Vanguard. So it's just it gets really strong, really fast. That's pretty much like the full setup, honestly. That's what I tried. That was like my goal, was to do what I just showed you guys pretty much every single game. And yeah, just win the game before they get to do anything. It's just really strong. It is getting a little bit expensive now. When I picked this up, it was a super cheap deck because everyone thought this was a tier 70 deck. People still think it's somehow a tier C, they think it's a solid tier, like tier C, tier B to tier C. So many people like argue that this deck is a tier C. I just don't know how. I don't know if people just I don't know if people have fought players that don't know how to play this deck, or if they just haven't tried it themselves, or if it's just like a in theory type of thing. But I definitely by nowhere think this is a... I did for a second. I had someone convince me that like there were just better decks out there, and actually caused me to play something else. But I actually regret not taking this to Chicago. I kind of wish I did. I maybe would have had a completely different game state half the time. Because I don't know, this deck just still has yet to prove to me that it sucks. It has been performing. It doesn't convert too well, actually. At Puerto Rico, there was actually a lot of FLAGBURG players. Somehow I actually didn't see any of them in terms of my games. I don't know how, but I dodged all the FLAGBURG players, and I was the only one that made it to top 8 out of there was quite a lot. Like, there was quite a few, and maybe that's the issue. Maybe it doesn't convert very well. I'm not really too sure. Every time I've played the deck, and I'm not trying to like put myself on a pedestal here, but every time I've played the deck, for the most part, I have only seen like good things out of it. I haven't really seen the bad side of it. It might be luck, might be a little bit of both. It might be just style of play. I don't really know. But I've been talking about this deck for a while for obvious reasons. I think it's amazing. But yeah, guys, thank you for watching. If you guys stuck around this entire time, I've been kind of talking my butt off for a while now, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If I come off a little tired, I'm sorry. I literally came back from PR like in the last 24 hours, and I worked, and I'm kind of just generally just tired. The weekend was pretty long, but it was a good weekend. I had an amazing time. Big shout out to Noman and Yellow. Appreciate them both. Again, to Sam and just the people that I've talked to FLAGBURG in the past, like Hollis and Cameron. You guys are great. Thank you so much who's been here with me. Thank you to the Peels crew cord who has also just been here with me, you know, cheering me on, all that kind of stuff. You guys are, as you're always, great. I was a little quieter this time. I really want to focus, and I didn't want to, like, I was trying so hard to stay away from my phone, so I was a little quiet while my rounds were going. But I appreciate y'all so much, as always, for being here with me, for just even congratulating my safety back home and all that kind of stuff. So you guys are great. Thank you as always, and I hope you enjoyed this. And like I said, if you need any help, you can always message me about FLAGBURG. I'm always here to help. So yeah, other than that, guys, peace out. До свидания. I'll see you guys in a future video. Bye.